I will introduce you to is Marcus Mattia. Marcus is a freelance EFL teacher and public speaker based between Italy and the UK, and believe he is in Devon at the moment. Right. He grew up in the UK, studied modern languages at Lancaster University, and then moved to Italy in 1992. He has 20 years teaching experience in both private and public sectors, teaching teenage and adult students, has been the Director of Studies of a Language School and a consultant for a leading educational publisher. He's currently working on an MA in TESOL and developing an interest in spoken grammar and action research. Marcus has 3 grown-up children and a very lively dog. Okay, thank you. Over to you, Marcus.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you. I hope everybody can hear me. Can you just quickly type up a quick yes in the chat box? Yes, fantastic, great, nice and clear. Yes, my very lively dog is actually here with me today as well, so hopefully he won't be too lively and steal the show. So I have the task of finishing today, I think, in terms of main presentation. So I hope you will bear with me and stay with us until the end. Can you now also see my first slide? Have I managed to upload that? Yes, I see some nodding heads there as well. That's excellent. So thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much to the Extensive Reading Association for inviting me to take part. I have several friends who are involved in the group, and it's going to be very exciting to see how it develops in the coming years. My talk today is focusing in particular on reluctant readers. Obviously, time is of the essence, so I'm going to be rather quick, and I'll limit my examples just to 3 specific activities that we can do in the classroom. And I do apologize if there's any overlap from previous speakers, because obviously I didn't get a chance to see the other talks beforehand, and so there's a little bit of an overlap. Donatella, as is customary with Donatella, she had lots and lots of things to talk about, and there will be some overlap there between what Donna said and what I'm going to say. And I think that's probably a positive thing as well, because obviously we need to hear things several times in order to evaluate them. So focus is on the reluctant reader. As a teacher, I always felt that one of my main aims was to try and get as many students on board as possible. We all know that most classrooms are relatively mixed in terms of ability and capacity of the students to perform, and motivation and that sort of thing. And so one of the great challenges, I think, for the teacher is to find that happy medium so everybody is on a good learning path. We know that there will always be a number of learners in any classroom who are not reluctant readers at all, be it because they've had a good experience with previous teachers earlier in their education, or because they're in the habit of reading with their family, or because they're naturally curious. Those kids obviously help themselves, and they are less of a challenge to teachers. So the idea here is to see just through a few practical ideas how we can try and get reluctant readers on board. Obviously, I do not have a magic wand. I wish I did. If I did, I'd be a rich man. So we're going to start off just with an old school type of activity. I've put this together myself, a little word square. And here, vertically and horizontally, in a couple of minutes, I will just invite you to see if you can find some words. Let's say, see if you can find up to 10 words. There are actually 21 in all. But see if you can find 10 words. Write a few words. I invite you to write a few words in the chat box, if possible, which I cannot see. So I might have to ask Vanessa to call out a few words, if that's possible.
Okay.
As and when people
honor,
start writing.
Consent, art, engage, consent, room, bow, happy.
Art was an extra. I wasn't aware of art, but great.
Marriage. That was a good one. Marriage again. Oh.
We'll just keep it going until I get a particular word. Just for my personal satisfaction. There's a very long word in there as well, horizontally.
Pie. Spare groom.
Groom is there, yep.
Hen. That's a bit long word. Heart.
It's a compound word, so it's 2 words in one. That will help.
Feel like we need to have the countdown clock on.
Indeed.
Court, engage, sweetheart.
Excellent. That's the
There you
word I was
go.
waiting for. Sweetheart. Then I put it intentionally. It was the first one I wrote, and I put it right there in the middle.
Well
That's
done, Maria.
So thank you, Maria. Very good. I'm sure some of you got beyond 10 words, and if you had time, you'd go all the way through to and catch all 21 of them. So you will have probably noticed that there's a common theme among these words. Who can tell me what the common theme is? If somebody can write it in the tap chat box as well.
Love.
Love, yes, a little bit wide, a little bit broader than that. Love was actually is actually in there as well. It's one of the
Relationships, honor.
love, relationships, honor, all correct. Broader theme of. If I give you a few more words, it might help. Church is in there as well.
Marriage.
Marriage, absolutely spot on, Vanessa. Thank you very much. Yeah, so that's just a really simple classic kind of style pre-reading, pre-presentation of a particular book, which we can do with virtually anything, whereby we can give the students a simple vocabulary activity, pre-teach in the sense we're not really pre-teaching, but presenting some of the key vocabulary that can be found in books. I think it was Donatella who mentioned that most readers today have glossaries in the back anyway, so it's very easy for a teacher, once she or he decides they want to do a particular work with a particular reader, particular book in the classroom, to pull out the key vocabulary, 20, 25 words, create a word square, and get the students, maybe in pairs, maybe in groups, just as a nice little warmer, as an introduction to that topic. And of course, we can pool the students in order to reach the definitive number of words, and check that collectively they all understand what words we're talking about and what topic we're going to then go and study. So that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about, where maybe some students are not necessarily ready for reading long text, but they will willingly take part in a quiz, especially if done in pair work and a group work context. Okay, so why are some learners reluctant to read? Well, I think we probably know that answer already together, but there's a nice little term that came up a few years ago, it's quite a few years ago now, which was a play on words, of course, which is this concept of weapons of mass distraction as opposed to destruction. And by this, obviously, I'm referring to the internet and the fact that so many, in particular, young people today are dominated by screens, and the printed written word in book form tends to be neglected a lot more by young people, with obvious exceptions. But there has been a well-documented drop in reading for pleasure in recent decades, both in Italy and elsewhere. And I think if we're honest, most of us today are probably pre-millennial, certainly pre-Generation Z. But this also applies to us. There's a rising cases of ADHD. There are rising cases of drop in attention span and so on, and we are indeed in an age of mass distraction. So that is certainly one of the reasons why reading seems to be dropping. Reading printed books in particular seems to be dropping off a little bit. And of course, at school and in publishing, we are making efforts to try and address this in two different directions. One is by making text itself easier to access. So a greater number of illustrations on the page, putting books online, adding listening, adding animation, adding a whole series of things to make the reading experience more similar to what students are finding in their own free time and what they're accustomed to. The other thing that I think is imperative to do is to actually re-establish the basis of reading books as well. And that's really what I would like to focus on today, is to look more at the printed book, as it were, even though we are online, of course. Lack of confidence, I think, is something worth saying, because a lot of less academic learners may find that print on the static page is a little bit daunting if they're not familiar with it, because we read in smaller chunks, and like I said before, with a lot of illustrations around. Many students, many learners today are more comfortable with video clips, with the spoken word, with comics, cartoons, that sort of thing. But of course, we know as readers, as people who enjoy reading, because I'm assuming that everybody who's here today is actually somebody who enjoys reading extensively. We know that when you read, one of the great benefits of it is that we create our own mental images ourselves. And so the classic example is, if you read a book first and then watch the film, almost inevitably you're going to be disappointed by the film, because you've already got your own mental image that you created. If you watch the film first and read the book, you might be remembering the film as you go along. But basically, we need to find ways to build confidence among students who are not so familiar with reading static text. Another reason, I think, is that reading for pleasure is considered a free time activity. This is talking in the context of classroom learning, more formal learning. And it's difficult to fit it in, therefore difficult to fit it in around more serious studies. And I think that's a problem for teachers as well, quite often. And I hope to demonstrate with just a couple of little things as we go along, that actually the language practice that we can do through pre-reading activities in the classroom has a very strong direct connection to our overall aims of getting the students to build up their language level anyway. And then the final point I'm making about reluctance is that the teachers themselves may be reluctant, because it's actually quite difficult to measure the effectiveness of doing extensive reading with learners. Quite a few people have mentioned testing and how we need to avoid formal testing in the equation of extensive reading, because it puts students off, it's demotivating, and they might think that we're just doing the reading in order to be tested. And there does seem to be a certain amount of, I wouldn't say obsession, but a great importance is given to evaluating outcomes. And we really want to be avoiding that, doing that too directly in the classroom. So the activities I'm going to focus on, the next two activities I'm going to focus on are both pre-reading activities. So I'm just focusing on that. The aim in both cases is to create some form of anticipation. The anticipation may be about the plot itself, it may be about the characters, it may be about the theme that we're going to then read about in the reader itself. And I think it's very important to make this point about questions being open-ended. The more open-ended a question is, the more it allows students to provide some kind of subjective response. Their ideas, their impressions, their opinions are always important in the view of motivation. So a demotivated student, or a student who is reluctant to express themselves, we need to address that in the classroom in order to make them feel that their views do have value of some kind. So a lot of the activities that I would suggest, and the two that I'm suggesting today, do not necessarily have correct answers. And if there are correct answers, they can be provided later, they can be discovered later as the student reads the text. And I think that's another important point for us to bear in mind. I would also say that with reluctant readers, I might be a little bit provocative by saying this. I don't think it's always necessary to strictly adhere to using English in the classroom. There will be moments when the students who the reluctant readers, the students who have more difficulty in expressing themselves, maybe have a good idea. They've understood the input in English, but they can't express themselves, or don't feel that they can express themselves directly in English. I think it's acceptable to allow them at this stage, when we're introducing a story, to allow them also to express themselves in their mother tongue, in this case, Italian. Okay, so let's have a look. Another example, and actually Donatella did make reference to this as well. The cover of a book. The first most logical place to start really is with the cover. And again, this is something that can be created very, very easily. You just take the cover of the book. In the case of this particular one, there are countless versions of Animal Farm, of course. And so, in fact, we could even take 2 or 3 different versions with different covers and get some different responses in that way by getting the students to work in different groups, each with a different cover. But the idea being this: what can you see in the image? Who do you think the man is? How do the animals feel? What is unusual about the big pig? What can you see in the background? These are questions that I cooked up myself, basically. And so, of course, there are no definitive types of question that we need to be asking. And it's very easy for teachers to produce an activity like this, which, like I said, enables students to give free responses and personal responses, which they may even disagree with. So to be conducted in a class context. Could be done first of all in pair work and then fed back to the rest of the class. Could be done in a presentation on the limb in the classroom. Just checking I'm not forgetting anything about this. Oh yeah, the other point is that many readers today also have illustrations within the text itself, within the chapters, and it can be a very good idea to get the students to respond to those questions, to respond to those illustrations before reading the text to which they're related. So again, they form some kind of hypothesis, they form some kind of ideas, commenting on the illustrations, and then when they read, they get confirmation or otherwise of what they thought. So working with illustrations can certainly be effective. Another thing, this is an activity that I quite like, which I took from a resource book, which I'll quote to you at the end, is to take the chapter titles. Many readers have titles to their chapters, and that can be a good starting point as well before we actually start reading proper the book itself. So in this case, we ask the students to read the 10 chapter titles, work with a partner and or a dictionary to check the meaning of any words that are unknown. Ask them maybe some specific questions. So a couple of examples here are, where is Louisiana? Find it on the map, because there's a map also in the first pages of the book, and look up some information about it. Maybe then share that information together. We're starting to build up some context about the story before we read it. Maybe focus on a particular vocabulary point or a particular point that's important, key to the story. In this case, what is a swamp? And can you describe what it's like? What a swamp looks like? What is it like to be in a swamp? How would you feel? Imagine you're in a swamp, all that sort of thing. And then maybe provide the title also of the story itself, and ask the students how they think that the chapter titles might be connected to the title itself. In this case, the title is 12 Years a Slave. Not a very cheery story, but it's actually a true story and a quite an important one, I would suggest. So in this case, some of the possible answers, if I were to ask the students to try and create some kind of connection to the book title, they might say something like, maybe a man has been kidnapped. He is taken to a slave house. The slave house is in Louisiana. He is then sold to a different person who is a new master. And he has to go and work in the swamps, etc., etc. Now, that simple little early description that I gave you actually doesn't correspond to the truth. That's not how it works, because I've read this book and it works slightly differently. And that itself, I think, can be a form of engagement for the students, because they form some hypothesis, and then as they start reading, they find out that things actually don't work out quite that way. Another thing you can do with an activity like this is to give out the chapter titles in the wrong order. Get the students into groups and ask them to try and find a logical sequence, and of course motivate it. So what might be a logical order of the chapter titles, and why do you think, and how do you think the story is going to develop? Of course, something like this, which is about the topic of slavery, can also be used in the context of a project. And again, from some of the resource books that I've been leafing through and some of the ideas I've been gathering, I've found that you can even do project work before reading the reader, which is quite an interesting take on things. Quite often projects are used as a sort of summary of what's been done in the reading. But in this case, it's possible to do a project and finish with the reader. So you do a project around the theme, in this case of racial issues, human rights, that sort of thing, and then at the end finish it with a reader. Of course, a lot of readers do have not only comprehension questions, but also things like this. So pre-reading, while reading, and post-reading. Again, mention has been made of this by other people today. And this is just an example from the same story. So read about the story on the back cover. How much do you know about it? Tick the sentences which are true. Check the sentences which are true, and so on. What's going to happen? So predictive activities, that sort of thing. And then the final thing that I would suggest is simply to go through the first page of the story together. Get maybe a different student to read out each sentence all the way through to the end of the first page. And when they finish, just do a quick comprehension check. And again, make sure that you ask the students what their personal impressions are so far of the character, of the situation, what they think is going to happen next, all this sort of thing. Now, the reason I say this is actually through personal experience. I'm going to tell you just a simple little anecdote now. Now, obviously, my mother tongue is English, and the first language that I learned when I was at school was French, like most of us probably, most Brits anyway. And I still remember to this day, when I was, I think, 16 years old, the first book I read in French. And I still, to this day, remember the opening lines to that book. Now, those lines are very famous because it's a very famous book, and particularly the opening lines are well known. I'm going to read them out to you now, just from memory, and I'm going to see if anyone, just for a bit of fun, in the chat box can tell me. I'm testing your French here. Can tell me which book it comes from. So it goes like this. Aujourd'hui, maman est morte, ou peut-être hier, je ne sais pas. J'ai reçu un télégramme de l'asile, mère décédée, enterrement demain. Have I stumped everybody, or can somebody tell me that? That's where it is.
We have from Peter Les Mis.
Sorry?
Michael says Albert Camus, Marina Camus, L'Étranger, Les Miserables.
Correct. Absolutely correct. It's L'Étranger by Camus. And the anecdote that I'm going to share with you now, quite simply, is that our teacher, who obviously I thought was a good teacher, and in fact it led me to then study languages at university, not just this simple gesture, but his approach was that he got us to read it out, and to read, in fact, the whole first page, and he did not ask for anything else but a comprehension check and then our impressions. What did you think of this? Now, all the critics talk about this as a very famous introduction to a book because it captures the spirit of the man very quickly, and he seems very detached. He seems to be more preoccupied with the timing of the event than the event itself, of course. But our teacher made a point of not saying that. That came out much later, much later. And what was important was that he wanted the students to engage in some way on a personal level, just for them to give their own personal impressions about what was going on. And I think that's good. It's a small little anecdote, but I think it's telling, and hopefully it illustrates a point quite clearly. So just
Thank you, Marcus.
I know we're running out of time. You're welcome.
We are running out of time. Talking about time, the event and the time.
We have run out altogether. I've literally finished anyway. So this
brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that.
About timing. So the fact of reading books, slowing us down and focusing on one thing at a time, which obviously connects to what we were saying before about distraction. Obviously, we know about improving vocabulary and listening fluency if we listen and read at the same time, encouraging critical thinking with the correct type of exercises, and also encouraging acceptance of doubt. because obviously when we read, there are lots of words we don't know, and we read on, and eventually the penny drops and we get those words. So really the whole point of what I was trying to say in my little moment here was to allow the expression, the students the ability, the time to express their own personal opinions and reactions, because open-ended activities do favor subjectivity. Many activities like commenting on photographs, like writing summaries, like letter writing, imagining you can be a character in a book or something, they are all directly connected to exams. So again, I don't think we are taking time away from the end game of passing exams by doing activities in the classroom, if they're the right ones, with graded readers. And the final bit of advice really would be don't give up at the first obstacle, because not all activities do work as we hope, but you know, try again. These are the references. So I glance into books. There you are. We can put them up on the Padlet.
Lovely.
Vanessa.
Yes, thank you. We will put those on the Padlet.